So a few years ago, Ellen told me about a dream she had. Now, and like a lot of dreams, it didn't make much logical sense. In this dream, she and I were married, and all of the children in our blended family were still quite young, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. But in reality, Ellen and I did not meet and get married until her kids and my kids were already teenagers. By the way, that's always the perfect time to get married and start a new life together with teenagers. But in this dream, we also had our dog Pearl. Pearl is a Westie, a West Highland Terrier. When in reality, we've only had Pearl for about 14 years, and have been 18 years. So Pearl was not actually around when our kids were small. This dream, like a lot of dreams, did not play by the normal rules of time and place. What was more important was how the dream felt. In the dream, Ellen had bought a bunny rabbit for Natalie, our daughter, who now lives in Santa Monica. Problem was, being a terrier, Pearl loves to chase and to traumatize innocent bunnies. So having a bunny with Pearl around would not be a great idea. Now, don't get me wrong, Pearl is a nice, sweet dog, and I don't mean to besmirch Pearl's character here. But as a Westie, being a vicious hunter of innocent woodland creatures is just part of your nature. So what are you going to do? In this dream, that was one constant point of anxiety. Would Pearl be nice to the bunny or be mean to the bunny? And would Natalie be upset by that? Yeah. On top of that stress, in the dream, Ellen had somehow misplaced our son, Kent. Kent now owns an insurance agency and he plays a lot of golf. But in this dream, he was just a small child, so she was searching high and low for poor little Kent. That's not all. In the dream, it was Christmas time, and the Christmas tree was completely devoid of ornaments. Now, in real life, many of those ornaments had already been given to the kids after they grew up as mementos of their precious, fantastic childhoods. But in this dream, the kids were still little kids. So, on one level, Ellen knew that she had already given them those ornaments, but on the other hand, they were still small children in the dream, so the whole thing made no sense at all. So, to summarize, was the bunny going to be safe? Where was Kent? And what to do about the Christmas tree? And why were now grown people children again? Or were they? That's just how dreams go. They are confusing, they're irrational. And as we talked about that dream, we talked about what it could possibly mean. We agreed that it was obviously an anxiety dream. We've all had those. An anxiety dream happens when strong feelings we have about stuff in our real waking lives becomes internalized. And in the skelter logic of dreams, when our subconscious is set free to run amok, those dreams are then acted out. So the question then became, what was happening in the real world when Ellen had that anxiety dream? Well, the day before, a large mob of people had burst into the U.S. Capitol to overturn the results of an election. A group of folks who believe in conspiracies and who were convinced they're patriots somehow doing the right thing. So that was the waking reality that inspired Ellen's anxiety dream. You know, as a history buff, one of the things I learned about any society is that uncertainty and stress and upheaval are not at all unusual. People try to build social systems and forms of government that are stable and secure and that provide prosperity and peace. But even in the strongest of social systems, in moments of transition, especially when those who have traditionally held power and influence feel that their power and influence are being threatened, that can very often lead to trouble. One such moment is described in our scripture passage today. It might not be evident at first reading, but it's there. Now, we first need to understand that this passage, and really the entire book of First Kings is a book about politics, royal intrigue, and power. Not unlike that Netflix series, The Crown, about the British monarchy in modern times. If you haven't seen it, you should. Except that the characters in the Bible actually had real power. They didn't just run around the country showing up at ribbon cutting ceremonies. Now, we don't know everything about the authors of these Bible stories, but it's safe to say they were telling the stories in such a way that their own agenda and their own policies, many years after the fact, would be seen in a positive light. So to say that these events in these stories were mythologized, it's a bit of an understatement. And that's why it's fascinating, though, how even a character like King David, arguably the greatest hero in the history of Israel, is depicted as a very flawed person. It is true. He had some big accomplishments. He united the 12 tribes of Israel into one nation. It's true that he was a charismatic ruler and a military genius. On the other hand, he's shown to be guilty of adultery and murder and being a very bad parent. His story is Shakespearean. Nonetheless, David was then and is now looked upon as the standard by which all other kings of Israel were measured. That's why when he died, it was a social and political and military crisis. His son, not his rebellious son, Absalom, who died while leading a revolt against David, but one of his good sons, Solomon. Solomon appeared to be a pretty nice guy. The question was, would Solomon be strong enough, smart enough, charismatic enough to hold this young nation of squabbling tribes together, to grow the economy, to establish a justice system, to finally get a proper temple constructed, to hold off all the foreign countries who were chomping at the bit to take advantage of the power that left David's death? That was all completely unknown. Would Israel be better off, maybe, looking to one of its military leaders to get to the position of king? Maybe. Solomon had no prior administrative or political experience. Zip. So it was a huge moment of transition. And it caused great anxiety. And not only were the members of the royal court very anxious about Solomon, wondering if he would be up to the task, and worried about their own power and influence, that worry inevitably filtered down to everyday people. So, Solomon went on what amounted to a publicity tour. One important stop he made was a place called Gibeon. And there he called a council with the leaders of the 12 tribes, and he also made a sacrifice at the holy site that was located there. So this was a political and a religious show of consolidation. To build on the success of his famous father, he needed to maintain peace, to squelch any possibility of revolt. And while he is there, the writers tell us, he has an encounter with God in a dream. Asks Solomon how God can help him as he seeks to establish himself as the new king. And in reply, Solomon makes a very interesting request. It is not for greater influence or power. It is not for wealth or any other material thing. It's not for any overtly spiritual gifts, at least not in the way we often think of spirituality in the Bible as being some kind of supernatural phenomenon. Solomon requests only one thing, that he be granted understanding or insight or wisdom or discernment, however you want to translate that. That's it. Here's his golden opportunity of all the things you could possibly ask God to give you. The story suggests for Solomon, it's discernment that matters most. In a time of uncertainty, widespread fear and anxiety for what the future may hold, it's discernment, understanding. That's what makes all the difference. And in almost every story about Solomon that happens from that moment on, his reign as king is described as charmed. It's amazing, as if he and the nation could do no wrong. Peace, prosperity, justice, and general being to be out all over. He was a whiz at foreign relations and economic policy and building infrastructure. Israel gained the highest splendor and wealth during Solomon's reign of 40 years. He undertook major public works projects. His time as king truly was the good old days. Now, he was not perfect by any means. By today's standards of personal behavior, and to be fair, even by some standards of that time, Solomon could be rather excessive. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And he carried on affairs like it was nobody's business. I don't know how the man slept. If you've ever heard of the Queen of Sheba, well, the story of Solomon is how we know about the Queen of Sheba, because she and Solomon had something going on, and it became the topic of much gossip. The way the books of the Bible were edited and added to over the years by various people with revisionist and political axes to grind, Solomon was also severely critiqued for engaging in those kinds of romantic relationships, especially his relationships with foreigners who had different religious beliefs, because that could possibly dilute the nation's obedience to the one true God. But aside from all that stuff, he's generally depicted as a stand-up kind of guy, fair, smart as a whip, compassionate, generous, brave, and just. His legacy is so great. He is said to have written not one, not two, but 3 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, that are simply filled with his sayings: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs. And fair, before you go flip to find the songs, the Song of Songs can be, how shall I put this delicately? It can be a little explicit. We do not read it in church because it will make you blush. Anyway, according to those who wrote about Solomon, the reason good old Solomon was able to accomplish all that he did boiled down to one thing. It was because he asked for and he received and he practiced discernment, understanding, wisdom. Now, the practical result of that wisdom, and the reason why people were so eager to record it in books and encode those books as Holy Scripture, was that it served to bring people together rather than to tear them apart. Solomon David may have used the squabbling tribes of Israel, but it was Solomon. It was Solomon who truly molded that contentious group of political and cultural adversaries, folks who couldn't stand the sight of each other, into a people, a nation that was united in a larger cause. It was Solomon who brought them together in a way that helped them realize that they had far more in common than any of their differences, that they were more robust and happier as a society when they put their self-interest aside for the sake of the whole, that they were healthier when they looked out for each other instead of being suspicious of each other, that generosity and self-sacrifice and tolerance does not make you weak, but strengthens you. And that is Solomon's real legacy. Now, these days, the daily news might sometimes get me down because, like all of us, it can feel as if our society is increasingly divided along political lines, religious differences, and all sorts of issues. You know all this. And a presidential election year, especially, that can be all we ever hear about. At the same time, I also know very well, or at least I trust, that people are and can be good and noble and wise. It's not that I seek to surround myself only with those who agree with me, with my tribe. It's that I believe that as much as we might face some challenging times, that ultimately we are up to the task, that we have plenty of work to do, but in the big picture of our life together, we will find a path toward healing and wholeness. You can call me naive, but I have to believe that. I must believe that. But I also know that for any anxiety that may haunt our dreams, there's always a reason It's as if our subconscious is telling us, look, this is a problem. So when we recognize that our options are, we try to ignore the problem, bury it deeper, and just hope it goes away on its own. Or we can fixate on it to the point of obsession. What are we going to do? Or a third option is we seek wisdom and we do our best to find constructive ways to journey through it. We should always be asking, what can I do about this? Now, of course, feeling like events are so huge and beyond our personal control, that can be a major source of anxiety in itself. Might not feel like there's much that any one person is capable of doing to make anything better. But I disagree. My belief is that the social and political fracturing that has occurred in recent years, both here and really around the world, boils down to a spiritual disconnect. Today as never before, thanks to social media and online algorithms, people are increasingly grouped with each other and with ideas that they're prone to already like and to agree with. It's as if we're being shrink wrapped into echo chambers that affirm that our opinions are right. And that limits the exposure that anyone has to points of view that might challenge or broaden one's thinking. And that's how otherwise very nice and sane people consume and come to believe in things that are simply not true. When anyone is only surrounded by one point of view, that's not too far removed from a daydream-like alternate reality. And yet, that same person can feel very connected to a community of people who share that same version of the truth. And it's hard for anyone to break free of something that does create a strong bond of identity and meaning and belonging. And of course, there's nothing inherently wrong about finding identity, meaning, and belonging. We all seek that, and it's a major positive aspect of belonging to a church, after all. But it's a huge one when it causes people to feel disconnected from other people so profoundly that they feel disaffected and alienated from those others to the point that they understand those others who may be their neighbors, other family members, as the perpetual enemy. But it can seem as though that's where we have arrived, seeing our neighbors not as friends, but as antagonists. On my own long spiritual journey as a Christian, and that's a path I'm going to be traveling all my life, I've become more and more convinced that who I am is inextricably bound up in who you are. And that the human family is just that. We're a family. When Jesus spoke about loving your neighbor as yourself, he didn't mention any exceptions to that rule. When he told of a man who stops and tends to the wounds of a stranger who was supposed to be his archenemy, he didn't say that the wounded man first needed to convert to a certain way of thinking or to believe in a particular religion. When Jesus became the instrument of God's power and spirit to heal and restore life, that power and spirit did not first check to make sure the one being healed was worthy of his care and compassion. They were all worthy, simply because they were inherently valuable human beings. If we learn anything from Jesus, it's that the disconnect that we feel from anyone is not God's design, but it's our own doing. God created us to live with each other in love. Any distinctions that we might make about, you name it, ethnicity, race, gender, our nationalities, creeds, religions, those are important in the sense of appreciating our unique life experiences, but we need to respect that uniqueness, not ever see those differences as a threat. We should absolutely love it when we have a chance to meet and learn from people who are different from us. We should delight in that. And we also need to rediscover and celebrate the larger reality of what knits us together. We are each a piece of the whole, a thread in a much larger and beautiful tapestry. Our destinies are bound up together. Far too often we can mistake that our different colors and textures as some sort of dividing lines. That's an illusion. In a spiritual sense, those subtle distinctions are just the creative variations on the spectrum of humanity that God created. And that is why it pains us for there to be a break in that continuum, for there to be a tear in that social fabric. That's why it hurts our souls when we witness division, knowing that we ought to be in this together, knowing that we should have each other's backs. That's why our dreams are haunted by anxiety and why our waking hours can be flooded with dread. So, what can we do about that? I think we are doing something when we seek wisdom, discernment, and awaken to our spiritual connection with one another, and we do all to nurture within that connection. And I know this sounds like a tall order given the sheer scale of the divisions and the deep disconnect we seem to be suffering from. It might feel like we're too small and insignificant to ever make an impact, but that is simply not true. We're making an impact by gathering together and sharing this very moment, taking this spiritual energy and light and love into our world. We're doing something by collecting food for the hungry. We're doing something by learning about those who feel angry and forgotten and threatened and discovering how they can be reconnected to the spirit of love that knits us all together, one person at a time. And we have plenty of work to do. But if we're discerning and connected, any positive steps we make impacts the whole spiritual fabric. It makes it stronger. Entire world-changing movements had their beginnings with only a few dedicated people. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you're also to love one another." There are no conditions. There are no qualifiers. There are no barriers to that love. There is no disconnect. Only the truth that God created us to love and God calls us to love. That is the wise reality in the midst of our waking hours. And it is God's peaceful dream for us to share.